Travelers Insurance Company as an investigator. That was not too much to his liking. Then he went to work for a crane company, which he enjoyed. And they were distributors of small and large equipment for
crane. Well, anyway.
For I can't think of it. For
Is it building materials?
steam fittings. And he worked there for many years until he went into the service.
Oh, that's right, I'd forgotten about that.
Yes. And he served his tour of duty in France. And thank God he came home fine.
Thank God is right.
And
when was that he returned, do you remember?
Yes, we were living on at 65 High Street. That was about the year of 1919. And we kept the Christmas tree up until he came home.
When was that?
Well, because Christmas was in January. And he came home in February.
Goodness sakes. I remember Daddy telling us about
Yeah,
that.
and amazingly enough, the tree held together until he came home.
That's wonderful.
And then he rested for a while. And we moved from High Street to back up to 40 Florida Street.
Is that the house across the street
That's
from where
right.
you lived when I first knew Grandma?
That's right.
Oh.
Then Uncle Dave bought the house across the street, number 41 Florida Street, and it was completely remodeled. It had been a two-family house, but it was remodeled to a one-family house, and it was really very nice. And Dan, with the help of another builder, a man who was a real builder, remodeled it. And that was the home that the family lived in until my mother died. Is that really going?
It is. It's going fine.
And
do you remember what year it was that you moved to 41 Florida Street, from 40 Florida Street?
From 41. Well, I was married in 1920, and I lived at 40 Florida Street in the first floor for 2 years. That would be 42. That would be 22.
Mm-hmm.
And then we bought Garfield Street.
Oh, yes, I remember that.
And immediately the changeover from 40 to 41 was begun.
Mm-hmm.
And
Uncle Dan then helped remodel that house.
oh yes, yes.
And he had come home from the service, and of course he didn't go to work. He took it easy for a while. She said he was tired.
Well, if you call it taking it easy, it was very hard work. But he enjoyed it. He liked that sort of thing. And then, well, we moved to 42 Garfield Street and lived there for 8 years. Well, you gonna shut it off for a minute, Mary?
Sure.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me look on Armory Street.
Now, wait a minute now. No, wait a minute. Okay.
When we lived on Armory Street, it was a one-family house. My father and mother built it. I don't know what year, but I know that Judd and Nay and I and the other little girl who didn't survive were born there. And when your father got a little older, there was a porch, not a full piazza, a porch. And then above it was a porch with a railing, you know. You know what I mean about
Yes,
the
I do.
railing out there? And he wanted to trim it up a little bit, and I can remember him cutting those little squares. These were decorations, and he measured them very carefully, and every so often, every so much of a distance, he would put another one. And I can remember seeing the nails stuck in so that we're ready to hammer and to finish. Your father did that. And then something else that Dan and Judd, and I don't know whether Nay helped with that or not, because Nay was pretty young. But more than likely he helped because he was very energetic to do everything. The house was equipped when it was built with furnace, hot air furnace.
Now, this was Armory Street.
This was Armory Street, and it was built. Well, of course, steam heating was not even heard of then, I don't think. But the house was not warm enough. Now, of course, my father had passed away by this time. And I can remember this because I was about 7. And my mother wanted steam heat put in the house. And she was not financially in a position where she could afford to have it put in. So she was a friend of, a business friend of Mr. Wyckoff and Lloyd. They were steam heating. They were a steam heating company. And my mother went to see them. And she said she wanted to have a steam heating plant put in, but she said she really couldn't afford it, and she thought the boys were too young. Dan and Jack and they. Of course, the others were off.
You mean to
school.
help do
To do it.
To do it.
To do it.
How old were they at the time?
Well, I think that, I was 7, and Dan was 7 years older than I was, so he was
heavenly days.
14. And, but my mother said to him, of course, this is hearsay, she told me all this. And she said, I know that they can't do it. They're too young. He said, they're not too young. He said, I'll loan them the tools,
Now, how many boys were going to do this?
3.
Dan and who else?
Dan and Jet and May.
Now, what were their ages at the time? You said Dan was 14.
Dan was 14, and Jet was 2 years younger,
He was
year and a
12.
half younger, and Nay was about 10. Of course,
Oh!
Nay would help in
Yeah.
some way or other. He was
Go
he
ahead
was
then.
a tremendous worker.
Yeah.
And he said to my mother, I'll loan them the tools. If they get stuck, I'll come and help them.
Now, this was to install a steam
A
boiler?
steam heating plant
Oh,
throughout the house. It was an 8-room house.
good
It
heavens.
was a living room, sitting room, dining room, kitchen, and 4 bedrooms.
And, of course, they'd never done anything like this.
Nothing like that.
Go ahead.
They measured the pipes that they would need for a particular area, and Marion, they would walk home. They'd go to Wyckoff and Lloyd, and they would tell them the length of pipes they needed, and those 2 boys would carry that home, that one pipe at a time, that they were going to do that night. This is all after school, on their shoulder.
14 and 12. Jut and Dan?
Yeah,
14 and 12.
they would, I can see them now coming home with them.
How did they know, the mechanics, where to put it? Did the man show them where
God
to put them?
enlighten them.
I guess that's the answer.
They would walk home, one here with one end of the pipe, and the other one up there with the other end of the pipe.
But, I mean, you have to put those little round corners and everything
Oh,
else.
they
I don't know
would
what you call them, but
they would have the threads
threads, right?
would have to be
Well, they're not threads, but the threads are fitted on the things.
the
Pieces.
threads, yes. Well, they call them thread. The pipe is threaded,
Right, the pipe is threaded.
and
They carried each pipe home. one a
each
day.
pipe home as they were going to use it. Of course, my mother couldn't afford to buy the whole thing all at once. And if I don't recall whether or not they ran into a snag or not, but I know that my mother told me that he told them told her, if they run into difficulty, I'll help them. And they put that steam heating plant in, and it was marvelous. And that went throughout the house. Of course, there were steam radiators. I'm sure they couldn't carry the radiators, so those would have to be transported by a truck.
Mm.
But they were wonderful
Okay.
boys. That's one. Then my mother bought, this is when we were living on Armory Street,
Right.
and I was 7. So that would have been, I was born in 1897, and I would have been 7 years old, so I would have been 7 and 14, no, it wasn't 14, 7, how old would I
Are
be?
you trying to think of the year on Annie?
Yeah, how old
You were
I
born
was?
in 1897. If you were 7, it'd be 1904.
Well, that's when it was.
On Armory
Your
Street.
father was away at
Oh.
Holy Cross at the time. And, well, they did that. They put in that whole steam
Imagine.
heating plant.
That's amazing. It's almost unbelievable.
And there was an H.B. Smith. H.B. Smith boiler.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that had to be put in by a steam fitter.
Oh, yes.
They could not put that in. Then And when I was 16, my mother, oh, in the meantime, the boys wanted to raise a little money, and they had what they call hotbeds. Do you know what a hotbed is? To raise plants, seeds. That
Well, it's an enclosed.
it's a little, well, it's like a wood all the way around, four sides, and then there's glass, like, for instance, a window glass, and that would be laid on top of it. And during the daytime, there would be a little wedge raised to raise up one end of it, for instance, the front end of it, so that it would get the heat from the sun and heat and what moisture the sun would give it. At night it must be closed to protect it from freezing. Well, that happened for about, I guess, 3 or 4 years. Then they decided they wanted a big greenhouse. So they built, it's too bad we didn't have pictures of all this. They built a big, all themselves.
Now, who were these boys who did it now? The same?
Dan and Jeff and they. A big greenhouse, glass here and up in here.
Who designed it?
They did themselves.
They had seen pictures, or they'd seen
Well,
actual greenhouses, and they knew what they were made of and how they were done.
That's right.
How old were they at this time? Was it much beyond the steam fitting
Well,
situation?
it was probably five years after.
So the oldest then was 19 and 17.
Around there, yeah.
15.
And you go into it down 3 or 4 steps.
Golly, they even had to make the steps down.
Yeah. So that
Was it a subterranean thing?
No.
They had to clear the ground and.
Oh no. Well, they'd have
clear.
to dig out the ground because they'd have to have space there for the plants to grow. And
where did they build this?
Armory Street.
Behind your house?
Yes, behind the house on Armory Street. Then these are things I don't think any of the family knew, excepting the immediate family.
Right.
And in February, when it was completed, when the greenhouse was physically completed, on February 22nd, they would go down to Dan McBride's manure pile. Dan McBride was a hackman, a coachman. He drove the hacks for funerals. And horse manure is very hot. So they would lay a layer of horse manure on that, in that greenhouse. And of course the greenhouse was covered up, and between the heat of that and the sun coming through the glass, and they put all this glass in together. Nobody helped them but God. And the 17th of March, that was the 22nd of February, then the 17th of March, they would take that out, take that horse manure out, and we had cows. They would put in cow manure to fertilize it. And then I don't remember what the date was when they planted the seeds, but they were marvelous.
Well, how did they get all this information about what to do
they
and how to do it?
They
They're reading?
read the seed books.
Imagine that.
And
Talk about being inventive.
yes.
Precious.
Dan, they all loved it.
Yeah.
And Dan really, that was about the same time that Winks started. You remember Winks?
Oh,
When
yes.
Winks flourished. And Dan wanted to stay there, but by this time, they've had it maybe for 8 years. And then my mother decided she wanted to get out of Armory Street. That's when she bought Florida Street, the first house. And, but kept Armory Street and rented it as a 2-family house.
Well, what happened to the greenhouse?
The greenhouse just stayed there. They did nothing with it.
Oh, what a shame.
Dan loved it. Dan didn't want to get out of there. But Dan was a very obedient boy.
Yes.
And whatever my mother wanted, it was law. And
It's too bad he couldn't have either lifted it up or else built a new one on Florida Street.
well,
But he didn't see his way
I
to do that.
I don't think there was room enough
I see.
on Florida Street. There would be room enough on 41.
Yes, with a beautiful yard, I remember that.
Yes. But
What were some of the other things that they did as young boys?
as young boys, they built a barn. My father had built the first barn on the property.
Well, he wasn't a builder, he was a printer by trade.
Yes, but he was handy. And that barn by this many years was becoming dilapidated. And
What year did your father die on, Annie?
the year I was born.
Oh, yes, 1897.
And the boys built another barn. Just the 3 of them. And I can remember...
What were they when they built this barn?
Well, when Nay was 14 years old, he came home from high school this afternoon and went right to work. There was never any play. No play. Or no go off with the fellows. He got right into his work clothes and started to... Now, of course, the barn was the risers were up, and the main part of the barn was coming along nicely. But Nay got up and he what do you call it? Shingled half the roof. Between
14 years old.
Between the time he came home from school, from high school, and he came right home from school, and it was time for dinner. They were tremendous workers. Then when my mother bought 40 Florida Street, they were big, wide, the floors were, it was an old house, big. So she wanted, my mother had great ideas. She wanted hardwood floors. So they took up those floors. I don't know whether they took up those floors or whether they laid the hardwood floors on top of it. But they laid little hardwood floors on it. And then they finished them. They sanded them and put the finishing on, and then the wax. They were wonderful boys, wonderful.
When Uncle Nay was 14, came home that day to put the shingles on the barn before dinner, he was 2 years younger than, did you say 2 years younger than Judd? who was 2 years younger than
Yeah.
Dan. There was 2 years between them, approximately.
Yeah, approximately.
So that the three boys who were then working on the barn were 14, 16, and 18,
Yeah.
approximately.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Then when they graduated high school, Chuck did not work in the post office, and neither did Dan.
Well, now we finished with Dan when we went off and telling about the houses. Could we go back now to, let's see, Uncle Dan?
Well, Uncle Dan also, he was not working someplace else. And this was when Nay and Margaret were married. And they bought that little house on Woods Avenue in East Long Meadow. He went over there and did a tremendous amount of work inside.
Now this is Uncle Dan. This is fine.
Are we on?
Yeah, we're on now. Fine.
As I told you, that house was an old house.
Right.
And there was a little hallway.
This is 41 Florida Street now.
Yes.
Right.
And he took out that hallway. And in taking out that hallway, it required support for the roof. So this is when he had that man helping him, that experienced carpenter. If you ever remember Florida Street, if you were ever up on the third floor,
Never.
it had a piece, big heavy plankings. This, and in this shape.
Oval, more or less? A dome shape
No,
at the top?
no.
Oh, they came to a
They
point?
came to a point,
Oh,
yes.
I see. Yeah, the way you were moving your
Yeah.
hands, I thought it was like
Yeah.
a dome.
And that gave support for the roof. And also support for the second floor. And then they made, in Uncle Dan's room, they took a little bit off of that room and made a hallway between Uncle Dan's room and Uncle Jeff's room that led into the back, into Uncle Jim's room and to the bathroom. Those were important undertakings. They don't seem too great to me, because I'm not that familiar with it, but when you can see what they did, and you realize how great it was. Well, they put in one heating plant there, another steam heating plant. Across the street at 40, they put in 2, because my mother was going to rent that as a 2-family house, which she did. So that was 4, plus the one on Armory Street. 5 heating plants. And it's a tremendous thing that the men lived that long after all that hard work that they had gone through. They were wonderful boys. And when I stirred at my mother's coffee, I couldn't help but think, what a wonderful family of boys.
I know it, honey. I know it, but they were all great. The whole family. Grandma was blessed.
Yes, she was.
Really was, and yet she was a very strong character herself.
Oh, yes.
She had to have something in her, possess some quality or a set of qualities that inspired these boys to do what they did.
Oh, indeed she did.
She was a driver,
Oh, yes.
and she was a matriarch.
Right.
No question.
Right.
But those boys, at the drop of a finger from Grandma or a
Right.
nod,
Yes.
would move into action.
Right.
We saw this as little children.
Yes.
We noticed this.
Oh, when she came here from Ireland, I guess that's already in there. But the courage of a child coming across that ocean, it was going to take 6 weeks, and with no relative, just 2 people that her grandfather happened to know.
Imagine that.
She really was wonderful.
Remarkable.
Yes,
Pioneer spirit.
Huh?
Pioneer spirit. That's what
Pioneer
she had.
spirit. This is right.
Absolutely.
And then when she met my father, she, maybe this isn't important to put on that.
We do not know. Grandma lived with
Her cousin,
her cousin, Mrs.
Martin
Cashin.
Cashin.
Oh, that's
Martin
right.
Cashin.
That's right. Okay, let's start there again.
And she was sitting on the porch and doing a little sewing, you say. And her girlfriend, I don't know whether she was sitting with her or not before that, or whether she just came along. But she wanted to go for a walk, and there were these 2 men. The man who later became her husband, and the friend of his. And he said he wanted to meet my mother. And so they went for a little walk. And apparently there was not a long courtship, but he wanted to marry my mother. He had said to his friend, I'm going to marry that girl.
For heaven's sakes, and he'd never met her before?
No. And so they...
Male chauvinism.
Huh?
Talk about male chauvinism. Go ahead.
And they went along. Well, I don't know whether they went for a walk. She never told me that. And so she put these things in her pocket.
What did she put in her pocket?
Well, the pants she was
Yeah.
making.
You didn't tell it on this when we tried to record. That's why I wanted you to
Oh.
read it. Yeah.
And I don't know how far they went or how often they met.
It's not going now. It's not recording. It's recording now? Oh, okay. Well, I'll turn it off.